Welcome to Parenting Teens with Dr. Cam, the podcast dedicated to helping you tackle the challenges of parenting teenagers without the drama. I'm your host, Dr. Cam. Let's get on with the show. If your teen refuses, resists, or explodes every time you set a limit, if consequences don't work and you're stuck in the same arguments on repeat, you're going to want to listen to this because today I'm talking to someone who gets it. Dr. Sunseri, a psychologist with over 40 years of experience working with kids and teens most people call difficult. He's also a dad of 4 and the author of Gentle Parenting Reimagined, which is all about making calm, respectful parenting work, even with strong-willed or defiant kids. We're digging into what to do when consequences don't work, how to set limits that stick, and how to stay connected with your teen in the middle of it all. But real quick, if this podcast has ever made you feel less alone or more hopeful, go hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And if today's episode helps, leave a quick review. This goes a long way in helping other parents find this too. All right, let's get into this for parenting defiant teens. Dr. Sunseri, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Dr. Cam. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. So let's start. Why work with defiant teenagers and not run the other way, especially?
Oh, great question. So I've been doing this for now over 40 years. And honestly, that's all I've ever done in my professional career is to work with kids that are really, really challenging. I started doing it after I got my undergraduate degree before going on to graduate school. And I've just stuck with that population ever since. I find it endlessly interesting, a huge challenge. And I love working with parents and families, teaching them some of the things I've learned about kids that actually work. And it brings me tremendous satisfaction to see kids get better and makes me feel really good when parents finally have some degree of order and peace in their home and in the end, ultimately, a much better relationship with their kid.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're all striving for, right? So tell us, why are some kids just more difficult or more resistant and defiant than others?
Well, I thought about this for a long time. And one of the things I observe pretty consistently is when a family presents to our clinic for treatment, there is a kid that they're bringing into therapy. There's one kid.
Yeah.
But a lot of the times there are brothers and sisters at home who, by anybody's estimation, are pretty, normal or typical. And I thought about this is, why do you have kids growing up in the same household, same parents, who then show up in the world in such radically different ways? And the conclusion that I've come to is that the more challenging kids, you can call them whatever you want. You can call them strong-willed, you can call them oppositional, whatever word you want to use to describe, that those kids just came into the world being harder. They're just more difficult to parent. And that's because likely biologically, genetically, there's some difference between them and their brothers and sisters. They're just that way, and they didn't ask to be this way. They just present that way and then do and say things that often drive their parents crazy and cause a lot of conflict within families. And so, when you think of parenting skills, however you want to define that, when you've got an easy to parent kid, a kid who says yes most of the time and usually pretty well regulated and agreeable and all of that, your typical parenting skills are going to be just fine for that kid. I was blessed. I had 4 easy to parent kids. But if you have a kid who's more likely to say no, more likely to maybe resist authority or have problems with regulating their emotions, they're just more sensitive. They just wear their emotions on their shirt sleeves. Those kids are going to be harder. And so the typical parenting skills that would have worked just fine with most kids don't work very well at all with those kids. And so that's where you have parents who have tried all kinds of different things to change the situation, but have had no luck because they're just redoing what they did with their other kids. So a large part of treatment, I think, with this population is teaching parents skills that they don't have. Most parents don't know this stuff. And the only reason I know it is I didn't read most of this in books. This is stuff that I've learned over the years through a lot of trial and error. But I've learned this stuff and I want to teach it to others. And every intervention, every strategy every skill that I teach parents, it's designed to be effective. I know it's going to work because it's worked with hundreds and hundreds of other kids.
Yeah.
And whatever I've tried to do with kids in terms of changing their behavior that hasn't worked, I stopped doing that. And I ask parents also to together we identify what are they trying that isn't working, so we get rid of that stuff. And then I will teach them things to replace those skills with that work an awful lot better. So it's not rocket science. It's a pretty straightforward way of doing things, but it's also pretty complicated and challenging. These kids have big behaviors, as I'm sure you know. You probably work with
Yeah.
kids who are suicidal and acting out and having temper tantrums or dysregulation. So it's sort of this complicated puzzle that I try to unravel. And so that's kind of the foundation of my work is let's teach you the things you need to know in order to change the situation.
And I would love to get into some of that. And I think the first thing I really want to get into, if you can help us, and one of the things I see is just a mindset shift in parents. Because I think when we have difficult teens, the blame of the difficulty is on the kids, and the desire is to fix and change the kids. Can you talk through that a little bit and how that might kind of trip us up a little bit?
Well, I mean, just to cut through a little bit and sort of, push away stuff that maybe makes it unnecessarily complicated is, well, first, honestly, we do want the kid's behavior to change. I mean, that's the truth of it. So if you have a kid who's telling their parents to F off or kicking holes in the wall or not doing their homework or losing their temper almost over just about anything, we do want their behavior to change. But it's not as simple as fix the kid, because in reality, what's going on in most cases is you have this bi-directional influence. So the kid's behavior influences the parents' behavior. The parents' behavior influences the kids' behavior. So they're in this loop. They've got this thing going on where everybody, with the best of intentions, is unfortunately drawing the worst sides out of each other. So a kid who curses at their parents, they're not going to get a particularly favorable response from their parents. They're going to say something like, "It's not okay for you to talk to me that way. I didn't raise you to say those things to me." And then the parent often gets upset or angry or resentful or pulls away and gets distant. And the kid then responds to the parent's behavior in an equally less ideal way. So they get more resentful, they get angrier, they start to poke back at the parents even harder, and so on and so on and so on and so on. So everybody's behavior is influencing the other. So again, what we do when we work with the families, we identify this loop, we point it out to everybody, and then we begin to change behavior on both sides of the equation. So we'll work with the kid and teach the kid things that they can do and say, that makes it more likely they'll get what they want. And most kids want the same thing. They want independence. They want screen time. They want to be able to spend time with their friends and the game and all of that. And so we'll teach them, if you want more of those things, here are some strategies you might think about trying with your parents, because the stuff you're doing right now is not working. We can all agree to that. And then on the parent side of the equation, if they're wanting their kid to listen and be respectful and, do their homework and all the things of life, then they're going to have to be really mindful of how they're showing up when the kid is doing or saying something that they don't care for. So we just interrupt that bidirectional influence, and we try to help both sides replace behaviors that aren't working very well with ones that do work very well. And that's just part of the game. We also obviously teach parents and kids how to communicate with each other, how to listen and give each other time to respond without interrupting or raising their voice. We teach families how to solve problems in a collaborative way. So say, for example, the kid is given X number of hours of screen time per day, but that's a 16-year-old who would like more than that. How do you talk about those things without it turning into a big battle? And how do you get everybody better at negotiating with each other in a reasonable way rather than simply just digging in, making demands? Digging in is, I'm not giving you more screen time. What the kid would often do is, this sucks. You have to give me more screen time. Otherwise, I'm going to throw a big fit. So it's about negotiation. So there's all the more traditional things any therapist would do about communication strategies, problem solving skills, but then also an emphasis, as I've been talking about, on how to tweak behavior on both sides of the equation.
Yeah, I love that. And when working with teens, it is very much, is the way you're asking getting what you want?
Mhm.
And they're like, no. And it's like, well, maybe we can change the way you're asking. And that's when they kind of listen up, going, oh, okay.
Exactly.
But so we're talking to parents right now. So what are let's just go real quickly on some of the biggest mistakes that you see, most common mistakes you see parents make when their kids are pushing back.
Sure. I'll just run through as many as I have time for. My wife tells me sometimes I'm long-winded. I think she's right. So cut me off whenever you want me to. And some of the
Okay.
concepts are kind of big, so I'll try to condense them as much as I can. But that's why I wrote the book is, everything I've ever learned is in that book. But start with just right at the top. Parents often, when they get frustrated, raise their voice. They yell at their kids. And you can kind of understand why, because often when we do yell at kids, they finally do the thing we've asked them to do. So you start off by being nice and you ask nicely and you give reminders and all of those things. Parents start off being pretty well regulated and matter of fact. But when you've had to tell somebody 10 times to do something out of sheer frustration alone, you're going to say, get it done, right? So you've raised your voice. That scares kids enough where they finally often will comply. But that's all messed up in a number of different ways. First, you don't want to teach your kids that they can ignore your reasonable voice and only pay attention to the angry voice, because they're just going to ignore you the way they did in that scenario, the way I just described it. It teaches parents that yelling works. So in the language of psychology, they're being reinforced for yelling on an unconscious level, but it just means they're more likely to do it again. Nobody likes yelling at their kids. I've never met any parent who enjoys that process. So they feel bad about it. The kid feels bad about it. And all of that is upside down. So you want to be able to get your kids to do the things that you want them to do without ever having to raise your voice. And so I always teach parents the value of being calm and matter of fact. And I think parents look the most powerful when they show up that way, which is, I'm not going to yell at you. Right. But I do have certain things that I'm going to need for you to do for me because I'm your parent and that's just kind of how it works. Happy to negotiate some of these things if there's room for negotiation. Some things, yes, some things, no. If you woke up this morning and said, I'm never going to school again, I will not negotiate that with you. You have to go to school. But if you wanted to negotiate how much screen time or how much time you spend in your bedroom versus out of your bedroom, those are negotiable points. So you want families to be able to get things done without anybody having to raise their voice. Plus, when you yell at kids, you've lost your moral authority, right? You've given that away because no parent wants their kid to yell at them out of frustration. So if you're not modeling that, then I don't know how you can expect your teenager to do the same for you and not scream when they're frustrated.
So what do you do instead? If you can't scream and raise your voice and your kid isn't doing anything when you're talking calmly, what's
Well,
left?
you solve the problem. So the problem is not listening. The problem is not doing the thing that you've asked them to do. So in a perfect world, where you want to get to is you ask your kid to do something once, maybe twice as a reminder, but there's no asking again and again and again. Because if you do that, you've fallen into the trap of you nagging them and them just ignoring you. There are a million ways to get kids to do the things that you want them to do. I can give you some really good concrete examples. How about a chore? So first you agree on what the chores are and you ask, could you please, take care of your chores each day before we sit down to dinner? And you've established this in advance. And most kids, when you ask them to do chores, don't flat out say, I'm never going to do that. Some do, but most don't. They just kind of say, okay, probably without the intention of actually doing them, but they just want to be agreeable and get out of the conversation. But that's all right. I'm fine with that. So now the expectation, the family rule is chores are done before dinner. The cool thing about that is you don't ever have to ask them to do their chores. It's understood that they're done before dinner. It doesn't mean they're going to do it. It means there's a good chance, probably half the time, they're not going to do it. And sometimes for legit reasons. They forgot, they got caught up in something else. The same way we all forget to do things sometimes. And sometimes they just don't want to do it. So they don't. So it's now dinner time and you say to them, hey, what happened to your chore? Remember, you're supposed to get them done before dinner. Go ahead and take care of that now, please. So it shifted from, chores need to be done by dinner time to the chore wasn't done. I'd like you to do that now, please. And then you see what happens. So some kids will do it because they legit forgot or whatever. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me get that done now. be great if it worked out like that, but sometimes it does. But if the kid didn't do the chore, then they will say a variety of different things in response. I don't want to do it. I never agreed to that. I've been busy all day. I'll take care of it later. Why can't you walk the dog? There's so many different things that they say. But the task in front of the parent at that moment is to ensure that the chore is done without raising their voice, without nagging, without giving out massive consequences that are just way too harsh, right? And so what I would say in that situation is, oh, well, but chores need to be done. So tell you what, I'm going to go ahead and ask you to put your phone up on the kitchen counter, and I would be happy to give it back to you once you do your chore, right? So what you're saying basically is your privileges are no longer available to you, but they will become available to you the minute you do what I ask them to do. And every kid dies to hang on to their cell phone. Some kids won't put their phone up on the counter because they're just too resistant to that. Mm-hmm. But there's so many ways that you can install a kill switch on devices remotely. It's so easy to do now. So you just go to your phone and you shut their screens down remotely. And it's too big of a conversation for here to describe how to do that, but it's entirely doable. So you don't need them to put their phone up on the kitchen counter. You can just shut it off. So what happens when you shut off a kid's phone? They get mad. They say, well, wait a minute, that's not fair.
They lose
it.
Well,
look, here are the rules. And the rules are you need to do your chores by the time we sit down to dinner. This is not new information to you. And I'm not going to argue with you about this. I'm certainly not going to fight. And you know what happens if you don't do what I ask. You're going to lose your privileges until you do. That's just how it works in our family. And I highly recommend that you don't get all bent out of shape when I turn off your phone, because it's probably going to make it even more unlikely I'm going to turn it back on to you until you've been nice to me for a while. So yes, kids will throw tantrums when you turn off their screens, but part of the understanding is when I turn off your screen, I do expect that you're going to accept the consequence without behaving in some over-the-top way. Because if you behave in an over-the-top way, then I'm really going to hold on to your stuff for a while until you've given me the positive behavior that you know you should have done in the first place. So if a kid who throws a tantrum when you turn off their phone, well, now your stuff is no longer available to you for a while. And the only way you get it back is you're going to have to earn it. How do you earn it? You be nice, you stay well regulated, you do your chores the way you know you're supposed to, and whatever else you have in terms of an expectation for that kid. So it's like, it's pretty straightforward. You just got to do the regular things of life. And if you don't, these are the penalties that you're going to face. Those penalties are entirely optional. You could go the rest of your life without getting a consequence, or you could not do what I ask you to do. But that's your call. That's your choice, your decision. I can't make you take out the trash. I'm not going to do that. But I can do certain things that I think are reasonable responses to not doing what I ask you to do. It's a pretty straightforward formula, but it works great. Not at first, it's going to be hard, because if the kid is accustomed to not doing things and blowing their parents off, you are upsetting the apple cart, which means it's going to take at least probably a few weeks for that kid to understand what the new rules are. And you're going to have to enforce the consequences probably at least a few times before the kid takes you seriously and comes to understand that what you say you're actually going to do. You're not going to back down. You're not going to blow up. You're just going to say, look, this is how it is.
So this is also assuming that the kid is willfully saying no, and it's not anything to do with struggling to regulate emotions, trying to set boundaries, being overwhelmed, any of those things, which is more of the trying to solve the problem than trying to just get the behavior. So how do you know the difference of this kid is willfully being defiant just to be defiant and can do it just fine, and now we're going to have to do a standoff in a way until they do it, versus, I mean, that's what I want to make sure they're not doing that, because to me that was sounding a little bit like it's getting to that, even though we're staying calm in it. I know the kids are going to push back and They can outlast quite a bit. So I'm trying to get like, what do we do if they're not doing it? And so you're shaking your head. So you're not seeing that when teens are backing off, even when they are very defiant to begin with, when we approach them this way.
Well, they're going to be defiant for sure. Where I shook my head is when you said it could be a standoff that goes on a long time. I've never found that to be true.
Okay.
So how long? What's the longest a kid has ever dug in before taking out the trash? A day or two, right? Okay. It's not a protracted battle of any kind. because
But I
it's in
think
their
that's
best interest.
I wanted to make sure though, because a day or two, I think for some parents seems like they're expecting in the next 30 minutes, right?
Oh,
So I wanted to set expectation, which is thank you.
yes.
I really want to get clear that this is not a change that they're going to immediately do. It's going to take time and patience.
Yes, you're correct about that. And thank you for pointing
Okay,
that
good.
out. So, when parents deal with big behavioral stuff, this whole process of change isn't overnight. It takes
Right.
weeks and weeks, months and months. So when we work at the family and we provide the family-based treatment that I've developed, intensive family-focused therapy, we don't expect any kind of substantive, noticeable changes in a kid's behavior for at least a few weeks at a minimum, and then gradually over the next several months. So behavior change is slow, and it makes sense that it would be because most families have been entrenched in these issues sometimes for years, and
Yeah.
the kid has become accustomed to doing certain things that probably often they've done now so many times that it's a habit for them. It's a habit to say no. It's a habit to lose their temper. It's a habit to dig in and say unkind things to their parents. And so in order to be able to turn that in the direction you want it to be, parents are going to need to stand their ground. They're going to need to be persistent. They need to be in it for the long haul. Because if you try to enforce a limit, I want you to do chores around the house, and you do that for a week or two, and the kid grinds you down, and all of a sudden you let go of that. Again, you can see the problem with that because all you've done is reinforce negative persistence. So it does require parents to say, we're just going to do this. And again, there's an easy way to make all of this work, and there's a way that's going to be more challenging. You get to pick, but we're not going to let go of asking you to do chores. The other thing you said, I think, at the beginning of your statement was, how do you know what's willful noncompliance, and how do you know which is just maybe emotional overwhelm? I don't tend to try to parse those things out, to be honest with you, for many different reasons. One, I think sometimes it's impossible to make a distinction between those two things. The second reason I don't parse them out is the strategies and interventions that I talk about in the book work equally well for kids who are just being stubborn versus kids who are more prone to emotion dysregulation or who do get overwhelmed. I always begin from the assumption that kids are capable, right? That they can do all kinds of different things. And I encourage parents to start with that assumption as well. Assume your kid can take out the trash without having a meltdown before you decide somehow maybe that their nervous system is incapable of doing that. I think when parents do that, they're selling their kids short. They're creating this unspoken expectation that you can't do certain things, right? But instead, what works a lot better is, I believe you can do this. I have every confidence that you can do this. And it might be bumpy, it might take you some time. There's going to be things that happen along the way. But if you set your bar of expectations really high with kids, it's going to take them a little bit of time, but almost always they'll get there. But if you set your bar down here, don't ask an awful lot, they'll do that. But now you have a kid that isn't super resilient or capable or functioning in the world the way a parent would want their kids to function.
Yeah.
So, if it's about getting overwhelmed, the way I look at that is, and I know this runs counter to some perspectives that folks have in various different parenting communities, but I think it's the kid's responsibility to learn how to regulate their emotions. Parents can teach and parents can talk about skills. Therapists can do the same thing. But this notion of co-regulation that you hear an awful lot about, which is sitting with the kid and soothing and validating. And if a kid is dysregulated, what all the science says to do is to not interact with them, right? Is to say something along the lines of, I can't have a conversation with you when you're yelling at me. But once you've
Yeah.
calmed down, I would be happy to help you with this or anything else. And that's all you
Yeah.
say. So it is their responsibility to learn how to regulate their emotions. And it's the parents' responsibility to put them in situations where they have an opportunity to learn how to do that without parents rushing in and somehow overly
Yes.
supporting them, because that denies kids opportunities, right? If you're the emotional regulator externally, how is that kid ever supposed to learn how to do that? Right? They can't.
100%. Right. And I want to point out too, because I think there's a very clear distinction here as well that I want to make sure parents are catching on to. And I want to confirm with you that I'm hearing this right too. I think one of the assumptions is we want to separate the assumption that our kids already and should know how to do this versus our kids are capable of learning it and may not have it yet. Because I think when we approach it as you should already know how to do this, that frustration gets in us and we start getting angry. Like you could possibly, instead of going, okay, there's probably a lack of ability right now because these are all skills they're developing right now that they need space to learn it. And you're absolutely right. They need to learn it on their own and how they do it. So they're developing the skill rather than relying and becoming dependent on us to do it.
I totally agree with what you just said.
Okay.
So if you think of a 5-year-old, 5-year-olds don't have the skills to be able to regulate their emotions. That's why they have tantrums, right?
Yeah.
Every kid melts down. It's totally normal. Every parent has experienced a meltdown from their kids. To assume that 5-year-old knows how to be mature and well regulated and on point, everybody would agree that the parent's perspective on that is disproportionate to the age of the skill, their developmental level, how well their brain functions, because the brain is obviously still growing for a long, long time. But, sometimes with older kids, we do falsely make the assumption that they can do certain things that still they're not developmentally ready for.
Right.
But at the same time, just as you said, and the point that I was making is, well, don't expect that they have the ability to do that, but also create the expectation that when something goes wrong, that they learn how to do that. They practice it,
Yeah.
they get better at it. Kids learn best by doing and by given opportunities to practice. So yeah, they're still going to have meltdowns. They're going to still say no. They're going to do all of these things. But it's the parent's job to create a space for them to learn how to do that stuff without rushing in, helping them in situations where they need to do it on their own. And that's part of sometimes where some of those parenting ideas come into play that I think actually are not good for kids. Because there's a lot of people who say, well, they've got diagnosis X, Y, and Z. And because of that, they can't. Well, even kids with ADHD still need to learn how to do their homework. They still need to learn how
Yeah.
to pay attention in class. That's just how the universe works. And even kids with, say, disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, those kids need to learn how to be well regulated in stressful situations and be kind to people around them at the same time. So there's an awful lot of voices out in the community saying it's this thing or that thing. I only know from my own experience and my own clinical training, this is what I think works. And so parents are free to do whatever they want. But I think what they really want is a better behaved kid, a home life that's more peaceful, no fights and arguments over things that just don't matter. I want my family life to be calm and peaceful. My daughters are all grown now, but I wanted to come home and relax and be easy and enjoy their company and vice versa.
Enjoy
So
them.
anyway, that's another long-winded answer to a question.
No, and I think we're both very much on the same page. And I think it's a matter of knowing the difference between you staying calm, you being able to validate that it's hard for them. You can definitely validate that their emotion, and that helps them regulate when they can identify it and don't have to like show you how mad they are. You're like, I see how mad you are, right? But then you give them the space to figure it out rather than you stepping in, and you give them the time that they need to figure it out rather than the expectation of you do it now. Now, here's my question for you. What the heck do we do as parents while our kids are figuring out and the garbage is still sitting there?
It's a great question. First of all, the garbage can sit for a while. The world will keep turning, right? So some things don't necessarily have to be fixed in the moment. There is wisdom in waiting something out, definitely. So let's say you're starting chores and now the kid is melting down and refusing to do everything. So you implement the strategies. Again, first is the expectation that chores just need to be done in our family, as they are expected in almost every other family. And your privileges are going to be tied to you taking care of the responsibilities of life. And that's just one of them. There's doing your homework. There's getting up on time and being ready to walk out the door without being late. There's being kind and respectful to your family members. There's so many things that, kids should be doing that parents are raising them to do. But if the trash doesn't get taken out, if it were me, I would just outwait them, knowing that it's probably at most going to be a day or two before they finally come around. I might end up taking the trash out myself if it smells bad, but then that kid's going to owe me another chore, right? So when they do finally acquiesce and say, okay, I want my phone back, I say, wait a minute, man. You never emptied the trash. I didn't like the way it smelled, so I took it out myself. I think you owe me a chore. Which one would you like to do? So there's still some compensation that's been made, even if for whatever reason you can't enforce the expectation of the moment, whatever that is.
Right.
And I never forget, if I ask a kid to do something, I expect them to do it, not in a harsh or a mean way. I'm super, super nice. The book is incredibly nice, I think. But that's what parents expect of their kids, is to do what's being asked of them without a big song and dance and emotional overload.
Well, here's the biggest challenge that I see with the kids I've worked with, and pretty much every teen I've ever talked to, is this need for autonomy and this need for control over their own lives, and their innate response to being told what to do is this like knee-jerk response of, I don't want to be controlled. I've had kids who are about to go do something, and the second their parents say, oh, don't forget to do it, they no longer will do it because their parents, and it's not to me defiance. It's more of I need this to be my decision, or else it doesn't feel good to me. It feels very controlling, and I'm fighting against that sense. So we create this sense of parents still wanting to very much tell kids and organize what they do and how they do it and what their day is, and teens wanting to own that for themselves, even if it doesn't look like what parents want. So how do we separate out what is something we need to hold still on and really enforce, and what are the things that we need to let go of so our teens can figure it out?
What a complicated question. Let me just share a couple of random thoughts. The first one is, I rarely tell a kid what to do, but I ask them to do things all the time, right? So when you have a 5-year-old, you can be really direct with them. Hey, go to your room and put your pajamas on. It's time for bed. And every 5-year-old, most 5-year-olds run down to the room. Okay, super easy. But once a kid starts to begin to move either toward adolescence or is in adolescence, they become very sensitive, just as you said, to being given orders. But that's normal. Adults are exactly the same way, right? So if I was sitting next to my wife on a couch and she turned to me and said, if she said, go get me a cup of coffee, I'd look at her and go, what? What are you saying? Now she said, hey, exactly. So I'm going to hold on to my autonomy. Now, if she had said to me, hey, sweetheart, would you mind the next time you're up, would you make me a cup of coffee? I would love that. I'd look at her and go, okay. So exactly the same task, but how it's phrased to me is going to make a world of difference. And that's where parents get themselves into trouble, is they're still stuck telling their kids what to do as if they were little, not recognizing the fact that there's a normal evolutionary process that takes place in adolescence where kids are far more sensitive to be told what to do. So you don't tell them what to do as much. And it's just about how you phrase things. And I did it with the example of the chores. Hey, I'd love it if you could get your chores done by the time we sit down to dinner. Thanks for doing that. So I'd love it if, how would you feel about, it would feel really good to me if, and I always put thank you at the end. Thanks for doing that. Why? I don't know, but it works.
Thank
right?
you. Yeah,
yes,
please and thank you work amazing with teens.
Yes, it's just about talking to them the way you would talk to a grown-up. Now, am I really saying to them, how do you feel about doing the chore? No, they need to do the chore. It's called mitigated speech. It's when you add a bunch of, how do you feel? God, I would love it if. It'd be great if you. It's just adding a bunch of words so it feels less like an order and more like an ask. So that's where parents get themselves in a lot of trouble. And also, yes, I think good parents pick their battles. They're thoughtful about what hills they're going to die on. They don't die on every single hill, right? You kind of decide what matters and what doesn't. Where can you be flexible? And you give kids love it when parents are flexible, because you're modeling being reasonable, not being stuck and rigid or being authoritarian and dogmatic. It's like, yeah, I think you're right. It probably doesn't really matter to me what time you do your homework every day, as long as you get it done. I'm fine with that. Because, why would you want them to do their homework as soon as they come home from school if, in fact, this is a kid who can get it done at some point in the evening? I don't care about that. Right. But if a kid isn't doing their homework and not turning in their assignments, then I sit down and I say, look, I think we need to build some structure around this. So how about we do this? How about when you come home from school? I still don't really care when you do your homework, as long as it doesn't bump up against your bedtime. But I'm also not going to turn on your screens until your homework is done and you show me that it's done. So take the afternoon, take the evening, and do your homework when you're ready to do it. But because you're not getting it done, then I'm also going to make sure you don't get your privileges until your work is completed. And if someday you're just not feeling like doing your homework, okay, but I'm not going to turn your screens back until the next day when you do your homework. So you're going to be without your phone for a while. Kids understand this. It's totally logical.
I'm going to ask you a challenging question now, because I personally am not a fan of using screens as collateral, because I feel that we're feeding into an emotional relationship with our screens and basically saying time with screens is positive time and time away from screens is negative time. And I see this really building out and into this need for screens. So what other recommendations do you have in terms of being able to establish boundaries that doesn't depend so heavily on screens?
Well, let me reframe a little bit of that for you, and let me ask you a
Please.
question. So, if you had a kid that wasn't doing their homework and had a bunch of missing assignments, would you allow them to hang out with their friends on the weekend?
100% yes.
You would allow them to do that?
I would absolutely, because them not doing their homework has nothing to do with their ability and social skills.
Well, but
So
don't you think it's normal or typical or acceptable for parents to say, here are your privileges, and privileges are earned, right? They're not just handed over
I
gratis.
Yeah, but I don't think hanging out with friends is a privilege. I think hanging out with friends is necessary for development, and it doesn't match. It has nothing to do with their ability to do their homework. And often
No,
those
I agree
very
with
kids.
that. But most of the time when kids don't do their homework, it's a motivation problem, right? It's
Mhm,
not a
yeah,
sometimes kids have learning disabilities and it's a lot harder. ADHD is going to make it harder too, but most of the time it's a motivation problem because they'll say that out loud. I'm not motivated to do my homework. I don't care about homework. Homework is stupid.
they don't.
So I think what parents do in that situation is they look for ways to increase motivation. Like, let me ask you that question. How do you get a kid to do their homework when they're just not motivated and don't do it? What would you do in response?
It is intrinsic motivation that I'm focused on, because if
Agreed.
we're constantly doing extrinsic motivation, the second that is gone, they go off to college. They haven't learned to be motivated to do schoolwork. They haven't learned to do it on their own.
Agreed.
They've been, go ahead.
Well, that kid doesn't have intrinsic motivation or they would be doing their homework. That's clearly what's missing from the equation. And when I
Correct.
think of intrinsic motivation, it's an internal drive or desire to do something that's not super enjoyable. So the problem that you're facing is, getting straight Fs, not passing any of their classes, saying they don't want to do their homework. What strategy would you implement to get them to do their homework?
This is more about understanding why they don't want to do their
I don't want to
homework
do
and
it.
why
It's
they're
stupid.
supposed.
Homework is
It
stupid.
is stupid. It's 100% stupid. A lot of times it really is. So then it's tying into,
Let's do
huh?
a quick role play. Would it be okay if we did a
Yeah,
quick role play? I'm the kid and you're the parent.
sure.
Why are you on me about my homework all the time?
Because your homework to me feels very important in terms of what you want to do in your future. And I know it's
It's not
very
important to me.
difficult. I
Bill
know,
Gates.
because
Bill Gates never went to college. He dropped out, and look, he's a multi-billionaire. I don't understand
you're
why I have to do
abs-
homework.
you're absolutely right. You don't have to do your homework.
All right, well, good. Why are we talking about it?
That's right. So if you don't do your homework, let's just look at what will happen if you don't do your homework.
What will happen?
Let's look at it. What will happen?
I'm going to interrupt you on purpose. I wouldn't normally
Mhm.
do that. Super disrespectful, but I'll do it
Yeah.
because kids do it all the time. Well, what's
Yeah,
going to happen? Are you threatening me?
absolutely not. It has
Well, then
nothing
what's
to
going
do
to
with
happen?
me. Let's talk to what would happen within your school. If you
Well, what do you
don't do
mean?
your homework, what's going to happen at school?
I don't care. I hate school. I keep telling you that. Why do I even have to go?
I hear you. I get that it's not fun at all to do. Why do you feel like you have to go?
I don't have to go. I
You
tell you,
don't?
school is stupid. No, I don't have to go. Lots of times I don't go, and I skip classes quite a bit too.
Absolutely. And I
What are
think
they going to
this
do
is,
about it?
let's talk about what that means when you don't go to school. I would want to get into why that kid hates
No,
school
keep
so
going.
much.
You're doing great, so keep going. I don't want to talk about this. I told you I don't want to talk about it. It's my choice whether or not to do homework. So why do you keep bringing this up with me? And all you do is you talk, and I keep telling you I'm not interested in this conversation. So shut up. Your turn.
Clearly, you do not want to talk about this right now.
Right.
Let's wait
Or
till
ever.
another time. Let's wait till
No,
another
Mom,
time.
no. I keep telling you I don't want to talk about my homework. Only you do.
Right.
So the
And
kid walks away from you, and the homework's not done.
And well, here's the thing. And I think, and I want to hear what your perspective is too. But from my perspective on that, when a kid hates their homework that much, there's something going on with them. There's a reason why they hate it that much. And a lot of them don't find any point in it whatsoever. And a lot of times, no, go ahead. So how would you address it?
Well,
how would you address it?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't keep talking about the thing over and over and over again.
And I wouldn't either. Yeah.
Okay, I'm not meaning to say that you would, but what you're trying to do, I think, where you were going with the role play is persuasion. Well, here's what happens if you don't go to school. You're not going to pass your classes. If you don't pass your classes, you're not going to be able to go to college. If you don't go to college, you're not going to be able to make a good living. I mean,
well,
that's
no, I personally wouldn't go that way because they don't care about any of that.
Right, exactly.
So I was trying to get more into why they hated it so much.
Well, the thing of it is, again, when you ask kids, hey, how come you're not doing your homework, which every parent asks, you tend to get this very similar responses from them. Homework is stupid. I hate it. I'd rather be doing anything else. I don't see a reason for it. I'm not motivated is a really common refrain from teenagers these days. And I suspect they mostly say that because I've heard other people say that and they've been exposed to that on social media. I'm not motivated is a refrain that's super common. So to answer your question, what I would do with that is I do a little bit of persuasion, talking about why it's important to go to school, but it's going to fall on deaf ears. They're not going to listen to that because that runs counter.
They already know all that.
Yeah, exactly. And it runs counter to their own self-interest. What their self-interest involved is not doing their homework. That's the agenda, is in most cases getting out of a task that is pointless. I would agree with them on that, but it's also part of life that requires effort, which is also something that physically feels uncomfortable to kids. But what I would do is I would normalize the expectation of doing homework. So what I would say is, it's not okay with me that you're not passing your classes. I'm not asking for straight A's, but I am expecting you to pass, and D is passing. So what I expect you to do is to do most of your homework on time, to also turn it in on time, because it doesn't count if you do it and don't turn it in. And beyond that, I'm pretty easy about the whole thing, but I don't feel good about you having your privileges, doing the fun things of life, the recreational type things, until you've met your responsibilities. And this philosophy, I think, is universal among adults, right? We go to work every day before we come home and goof off. We understand the importance of meeting our life's responsibilities, even if we don't want to do them, even if they require effort, before we have the option of enjoying the good things that come from that. So to say to a kid, you get to see your friends on the weekend and just goof off and hang around, even though you have all straight Fs, I would say, look, I don't feel good about you seeing your friends this week until you get your homework done. Also, I don't feel good about you getting on your screens and talking to your friends and being on Discord or watching YouTube videos until you've done your homework. You can still do those things, absolutely. But my expectation is that you get your homework done. Why? Because it's part of life. And then I would do no more persuasion beyond that. And proof is in the pudding. The strategy works great. It works just about every time.
I mean, and if it does, it does. I think the thing that I struggle with is that shows what is important and what your value is in your grades, and it is not in the rest of who you are.
No, it's
Right.
not. Your value is not your grades. I didn't say that. I said, I
Hmm.
expect you to pass your classes. I didn't ask for straight
Right.
A's. The value is in them. It's who they are as a human being, all the
Learning how to
great
do it.
ways they show up and positive qualities that you have. And nobody's value is whether or not they do their homework, but they still need to do their homework. Those things, to me,
Yeah.
values and homework are unrelated. You'd also made the point, well, what happens when they go off to college if these external motivations aren't there? Well, what happens with kids typically is first you just talk about, gosh, in the next week, I'd like you to catch up on some of those missing assignments, blah, blah, blah. And some kids will actually do a few of them, which is super easy.
Hmm.
But most kids that I work with won't. And
Yeah.
so then you go on to leveraging privileges, because without the leverage, you've tried that and it didn't work. And then what happens, you start to leverage the privileges. They don't agree with that at first, and there will be some resistance, but that's okay. You just push through the resistance. And then they start doing their homework. And that's where the intrinsic motivation starts to kick in, because once they see that it feels good to get their homework done and not have
Mm.
missing assignments or being late, that they start to see their grades coming back up, that they start to see that there's no longer fights with their parents about their homework, then intrinsically that feels good to them. And that's what moves it along. And as kids start to get caught up on their work and are mostly turning their assignments in, then I begin to negotiate with them about removing those external constraints. Hey, you probably don't like it that you lose your phone when you
Right.
don't do your homework, but you've been doing really well with this. Gosh, your grades have come up. Thankfully, we don't have to argue about this anymore. I would be willing to consider the possibility of letting you have your screen time as. Can you do a quick role play with me? Just a really fast one.
Yeah. You want me to be the parent now?
Yeah, yeah. Hey, I gotta tell you. No, you're the kid. I'm
Oh,
the
I'm the
parent.
kid. Yeah.
Hey, I
So
gotta
I
tell you
don't want to
something.
do my homework.
Well,
Yeah.
hold on a second. No, no, no. This is where they've now started to do it. You've leveraged their screens. They're starting to turn in their assignments. Things are good,
Okay.
but you want to
Okay.
remove the
Oh, you get the
external.
easy kid. Okay. You get the one that's
No,
already
no, no, no.
doing
He
it.
was a hard
Okay.
kid at first, but I've gotten him to do his
Okay.
homework, and now he's doing it. So all
Okay.
is good. But I'm speaking to your point of the external motivators. I want to get rid of those. You made a very good point. So I
Yeah.
want to have this conversation with the kids. So, hey, I got to tell you something. I'm so stoked about the fact that you've been doing your homework, you've been turning all your assignments, and you've been doing a really good job with this. And I just wanted to acknowledge that and thank you for it.
Okay. I wasn't doing it for you, but
Well, I don't think
okay.
you were. I think you were doing it to get your screens, but that's okay with me. So, can I ask you a question? Would you be interested, maybe, in being able to do your homework and not have it tied to your privileges? Just as a for instance, maybe you're not interested in this,
Does
but I
that
was
mean I get
wondering if
my
you might
phone
be.
back?
Well, that's
Does
kind of
that
what
mean
I
I
was
get
thinking. Is that something you would like?
Yeah, I'd like my phone back.
Well, I don't have your phone. Remember, you get to earn your screen time every day. I don't want to hold on to your phone. But I'm wondering if you would maybe prefer that when you come home from school, your screens are enabled on rather than only turned on after you've done your homework. I don't know if you're interested in this, are you?
Ah, absolutely.
I think
Yeah.
that's great. I think you're kind of at an age where now that you're doing your homework, I think this is awesome. So you would like maybe to do this.
Yes.
C- Can I ask you something? What can you think of what I might get in an exchange if I were to agree to this deal?
What do you mean? What do you want?
Well, what do you think I want?
Well, you want me to do my homework.
Well, yeah, for sure. So if I agree to this deal whereby I give you your screens pretty much all the time, so in exchange for that, I would want you to do your homework, correct?
Mhm.
So if you were doing your home, if we do this and I give you your screens and you're doing your homework, I'm super happy with that arrangement. I suspect you would be too. Yes.
Yeah.
Fantastic. We want to give it a go.
Yeah, let's try it. That's
Okay.
good.
Out of curiosity, just in case, I think this is a remote possibility, but what would happen if we did this and after a couple of weeks, you stopped doing your homework assignments? What should we do then?
Right. Well, I'm gonna do my homework.
Well, that's great. That's fantastic. I love the commitment. But just on the off chance something goes wrong, despite your good intentions, what do you think I would do then?
Nothing.
No, wait a minute. Hold on a second. Because what we're doing from my perspective is getting the homework done. Don't you think likely we would go back to the old plan of screens are off until your homework is done? And then don't you think I'd probably go back to that?
Well, what if the homework's too much?
You just got to do it. Look, sometimes it is too much. You just got to do it. Again, all I'm asking is to turn stuff in and get a D or better. I'm only asking you to pass your classes. And sometimes it will be too much, but I still expect you to pass your classes.
That seems fair.
So it does seem
No,
fair to
it
me.
seems fair.
So if we try this deal, and again, I love what you're saying to me about this stuff, but it turns out that after making this deal with each other, you're not doing your homework again. What do you think I'm going to do?
You're going to take my phone.
Well, I'm going to go back to the old plan, which is, you get your phone after your homework is done every day. So yeah, I'm going to go back to that. But I don't think we're going to have to do that because you seem super committed to me.
That's good.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, thank you for having this conversation with me. I feel really good about it. I hope you do too. Enjoy your screens.
I liked that. That was very good. That was great. I like
Yeah.
that.
So what are the principles? You got to get them started on doing their homework and get them over that inertia. You have to cut through this noise of I'm too overwhelmed to do my homework. Well,
Yeah.
You're not too overwhelmed to get D's, right? You can at least make more of an effort. Now they're in a rhythm of doing their homework. You've pushed through the resistance. They're starting to feel some of that intrinsic motivation. You're not fighting. They're getting decent grades. Nobody's annoyed with them anymore. You do until that new behavior is established as a habit, and it will be. How long does it take a kid to establish a new behavioral habit? A couple months. So if I was with a kid in a couple months and homework is all swell and good, then I would want to renegotiate this. I'd want to give them back what I think is typical or normal, which is you don't take a kid's phone when they first come home from school. You let them have their phone all the time, the way we keep our phones. Mm-hmm. But I would only enter into that negotiation if I feel that they are now consistently doing their homework. And then I would want to make it such that I'm not applying those external motivations any longer and test out their ability to continue to do their homework. In a perfect world, they'll just get it done. Maybe not perfectly, but good enough. It really doesn't take that much homework to get a D. It really doesn't. Right. And then if the plan falls apart, that teaches me that they still need that external structure. And I will happily go back to that plan. And I'd wait a little bit longer and then I'd try to renegotiate again with the whole objective going in the direction of they're independent with their homework. They don't need any prodding from me. They either need no help to do their homework or minimal help from me. We're not fighting about it. And the thing is just a well-oiled machine that works without any assistance from myself.
I love that. And I think the thing that, so to clarify, you're picking one thing that you want to focus on, because I want to make sure too, because I know a lot of parents will be like, oh, I'm going to do this across the board with everything, right? So it's like, what?
Everything would be too much. It'd be unwieldy.
Yeah. So you're picking like one thing, which is homework, right? Which I think is great because it is teaching responsibility, is teaching resilience and pushing through. So you're focused on that. You're not losing your cool. It's just, this is the agreement. And you're giving them the opportunity to do it, to either make the choice or not make the choice. And when they've continued to make the choice without the argument, you clearly recognize that. And you give them back whatever it was that you were using or holding back as the extrinsic motivation, so they start developing their intrinsic motivation.
Yes, that's a great summary of what I was trying to describe. To address the point of, parents want to do everything. It really, to me, it doesn't feel like it's a big, long list of things to do, because a lot of things fall under certain categories. Like, what do you really want your kids, what do you want from them on a day-to-day basis? If it's a teenager, I'd want them up to an alarm and move through their morning routine with a minimum of nudging and assistance from me, preferably none. I want them in the car on time to go to school. I want them to be, reasonably respectful to their teachers, move through the school day without getting themselves into some kind of trouble, whether it's with the teachers or with peers. I want them to come home. I want them to be respectful, just generally nice, or at least neutral towards me, right? I'd want them to get chores done. I'd want them to come to the dinner table. I'd want them, as we've been talking about, to do their homework. I want them in bed at a reasonable time. It doesn't feel like a long list of things. To me, that hits all the high notes. And so in our work with kids, we try to hit all the high notes. We try to give parents all of those things, but we don't start off with every single one of them. We don't. It's sort of like we establish a foundation of something, establish that skill, and then we go on to the next, when we move up a hierarchy. So for example, a kid who's self-harming, that's at the top of the hierarchy. We sure don't start with that. We start with what I think of as low-hanging fruit. So maybe that kid isn't doing chores yet. Let's do that. Maybe we want to get them out of their bedroom for an hour or two a day. Let's start with that. And then as those things become successful, then we hit the bigger ticket items. For some kids, it's not self-harm. For some, it's going to school at all. They've refused to go to school, which is a huge deal these days. For some, it's being so explosive that you can't ask them to do anything without it blowing up into something. There are a lot of variations on what we work on, but we don't do everything all at the same time. But we want to give families everything that I just mentioned on that list. And I do think in the vast majority of instances, we can give people exactly what they want. So there's almost no conflict in the family anymore. Some of those big behaviors have been reduced to zero. I want zero temper tantrums. I want zero self-harm. When you get to that point, the real gift that comes from it is the relationship parents have with their kids becomes so much better, right? You clear away all that noise, all that upset and conflict and fighting and the behavioral stuff that makes it hard for parents to stay close to their kids. You get rid of all of that stuff. And then the relationship blossoms, right? They're loving and communicative and they want to spend time with you and stop telling you that they hate you. And at the same time, you give them a ton of freedom and autonomy and space of their own to pursue their own, adolescent lives. That's the real gift, is getting a relationship back to where every parent wants it to be, which is loving and kind and thoughtful giving.
Yeah. And I think the kids feel better about themselves when they're able to do these things, right? When they feel good about helping out around the house and they get recognized and acknowledged for that. And that's a positive experience. When they see that they can do hard things and make it through, and that they learn how to self-regulate on their own, this is where confidence and resilience builds. And when they feel good about themselves, they're nice to other people. When they don't feel good about themselves, they're not very nice. And I think that's a piece of this too. And I think what you're saying is, how do we be strong, sturdy parents, but you're still kind and empathetic and compassionate and understanding, and you're not controlling it.
You're right.
You're focused on one thing that you see they're struggling with, and how do I help give them the tools and the motivation to push through until I can back off.
The book is called Gentle Parenting Reimagined. It's all about gentle parenting. You can have expectations of your kids. You can change all of the behavior that most parents struggle with and still be super gentle. Like with my own 4 daughters, and I'm not saying this because I was all that. The only way I was able to pull this off is because I'd worked with kids for so long before having kids. I never once raised my voice with any of my daughters, ever.
Yeah.
And why? I don't need to. I can be loving and kind and soft and gentle, but then also at the same time, be reasonably firm when I need to be. It's like, well, you have to do these things, or it's not okay to say that to me. So you can enforce reasonable expectations and family rules, but still do it in a super loving and kind way. That's the sweet spot right there. Hey, I'll leave you with this. I'm not sure how much more time we have.
No, we've gone way over, but this is so important.
Okay,
and I think parents are going to love this. So it's good.
Here's something that most parents don't know, which is kids feel better when they do better. Most parents assume it's the opposite. It's that when they feel better, they do better. I think that's totally upside down and certainly inconsistent with my own observations over decades now with kids, which is you have to get them to do better. And that's what makes them feel better, right? So super simple example, if you have a kid who's depressed, so depressed they're not leaving their bedroom and they're parked on a screen all the time, and parent goes to their room and get out. I mean, all those kinds of different things. That's a recipe for a miserable human being. If you wanted to make anybody miserable, a kid or an adult, put them in that situation, right? And then we say, oh my God, they're depressed. Well, they're depressed because of the situation that they're in. So the way you help somebody not be depressed is you change the situation. You get them out of that room. You get them off those screens. You engineer the environment so they're now incentivized to do anything other than be in a darkened bedroom. You start to get them back to school. That kid thrives. That's going to be a happy kid, a loving kid, a kid who doesn't walk around saying how unhappy and depressed they are. They say, I had a good day today, right? But you have to change what they're doing before you can change how they feel about themselves and their lives. So many parents and so many therapists start with the feelings. Well, I got to help them feel better. Otherwise, how can they go to school? That it just doesn't work like that. I wish it did, but good luck getting a kid who's dropped out of school and is living in a bedroom all the time good luck helping that kid feel better, because what's wrong is the situation that they're in. Nothing wrong with them. It's just a situation.
No. And I think it's very important to let kids know that you can do stuff even when you don't feel okay.
Yes.
And that's a really, because I hear a lot of parents say, I just want my kid to be happy. I'm like, that is a state of mind that is very temporary. And happiness comes from a purpose and from feeling fulfilled,
Agreed.
right?
Yeah.
So I think I agree with you. I think it's important that we're not always trying to make them feel okay. They're allowed to not be happy about doing something. They don't have to like doing the chore. They don't have to be like, yay, I get to do, if they do it, right? They can
Right.
grumble while they do it. That's fine.
100%. And the grumbling, it was like, oh, I hate this. This is stupid. Why do I have to empty the dishwasher? I don't care about that. It's not hurting me in any way. And the dishwasher is still being emptied. Now, if they go to empty the dishwasher, they throw a glass and say, F you. Well, okay, that's a problem.
That is a problem. It's very different. Right.
We all want our kids to be happy. But if that's the only thing you're going for is to not do or say anything that upsets them even remotely, you've done your kids a grave disservice. It's a large part of parenting, including parenting of kids who are neurodivergent or kids who have other kinds of mental health challenges. It's important to tell your kids no. It's important to say, I'm not going to let this happen. And I love you, and you may not agree with what I'm going to do. I'm not really asking for your agreement, but I am telling you how it is. Kids want and expect their parents to set limits with them. They do. We're all wired for that. And when parents don't set limits, either because you're worried you're going to make them bad or you think it's going to ask too much of them or whatever it is, now you're creating a dependent human being who's miserable. Right? That's not a kid that's going to go out into the world and light it on fire. They're not going to go to a great college and do really well in school and have some fabulous job. That's a kid who's going to be at a low level of functioning. And then the parents will wring their hands. Well, why is this happening? It's because you haven't asked anything of them. You've lowered your expectations to the point where that no kid feels good about not doing anything. No human being does. Yeah. Right? The treatment for depression isn't being in a darkened bedroom and doing nothing. It's doing things. So there's some psychoeducation that we do with kids too. Look, I know you're not going to want to do anything. I know you'd rather stay in your room because that feels kind of safe and easy. But what we know about depression, what we know about anxiety, and it's going to blow your mind, the treatment is actually doing the opposite of that. It's putting yourself in situations that make you anxious, and they're only going to make you anxious for a while because then you're going to eventually you'll stop feeling anxious. The treatment for depression is actually doing things every day, accomplishing things. We'll start with small stuff. But if you're not doing anything, then you're going to be miserable and unhappy. And as your parents, people who love you, we're not going to let you do that. So yes, we're going to do things that you don't agree with because that's what we need to do.
Yeah. And I think it's really important to be doing this with intention, not fear. Because a lot of times people will see the fear. And if I don't deal with this right this second, they project into the future what a terrible person their child is going to be, rather than saying, this is skill. This is going to take time. There's a lot that we're countering. And a lot of it is building their trust with us. Yes. And that relationship is really important. And if we're trying to constantly just control, it's very different from what you're saying. And I want to make sure that's very clear. This isn't about control. This is about setting some boundaries and helping them learn for themselves by establishing some external.
100%. I don't ever want to control anybody's behavior.
Yeah.
But if I'm raising a kid, I want them to be hard workers. I want them to have grit. I want them to be kind and respectful to others, right? I want them to be able to step into life and do things even if they don't care to do them, right? We all do this as adults. How many things do you do in a day that you don't really want to do?
More than I can count.
Exactly. But you also...
Not all the time. I don't always do them.
That's very true. But that's the same philosophy you'd want with your own children, which is life is sometimes hard. It is sometimes stressful. It is even sometimes overwhelming. But I have confidence that you can get through these situations and get to a place where you feel strong and good about yourself. We talk so much about self-esteem. The way you teach or help kids have better self-esteem is not by lowering those expectations and not making demands on them. It's by putting them in situations where they grow. We grow in hard spaces, not easy spaces. So the way people become resilient is it's over the course of a lifetime of doing hard things. I know you've done tons of hard things in your career. God knows I have too. But I have a sense of confidence because having done all those things and pushed through them and mastered some of them, but not all of them, plenty of failures along the way, that's what gives me a sense of self-confidence. But this is a generation of kids, the Gen Zs, who lack self-confidence because the world has decided nobody expects anything of them anymore, or they talk their parents out of those expectations.
And some of the things the teens tell me a lot is that, and what really frustrates them is that they don't believe their parents believe they can do it. They don't believe I can do hard things. They don't believe and that is crushing to them. Yes. Instead of saying, this is going to be really hard and I know you can do it. That's what they need to hear.
And I'll help you. I'll support you along the way. Whatever I can do to best help you get your driver's license, I'm going to do it. But you need to get your driver's license, right? So when you excuse a teenager from the normal responsibilities of life, you're sending them the message that they are damaged goods, that they are incapable of doing things. And they will begin to internalize that message, believe that to be true of themselves, and then they become damaged goods, right? Kids who are incapable of doing anything. Yeah. Again, it's a whole generation, not every Gen Z, obviously, but a lot of Gen Zs, you just sort of hear this about them. Yeah. And that's because it's been married to a generation of parenting that I think, it's so much emphasis. Most parents that I work with are millennials, or maybe, on the tail end of Gen X, occasionally Gen Z parents. But parenting has shifted a lot over the generations. And honestly, I think the sweet spot are the younger baby boomers, because that's the first generation that I think started to want to do it differently from their parents, let go of that authoritarian style, spend a lot more time with their kids, are way more invested in them, have conversations with them. I think the baby boomers grew up with the super authoritarian style that they ultimately rejected. And then that was passed to the Gen Xers. So I think young baby boomers and Gen Xs are basically the same generation. So their style of parenting was really the first that did that. Thank God for that. But then I think with millennial parents, it's sometimes the pendulum has gone too far, where yes, love your kids and be involved in their lives and do all the great things, but there's less of an emphasis on just reasonable limit setting, which is, it's not okay to do this, and I expect you to do that. And so I think you have Gen X and soon the Gen Alphas being raised by a group of people who are loving and kind and super attentive, all the good things, but are not very good at just saying, you got to do your homework the way my parents would have done. And that's the part of parenting that they did get right. I'm not going to fight with you about your homework. I'm not going to fight with you about whether you need to be in school. You got to be in school and you got to do your homework. Now, the ways they enforce that, I think, should be tossed out. But it's just a whole different generation of raising kids. And we have a whole generation of kids being raised. And I think what the data tells us is these are, again, not super resilient kids. And they're not happy kids. Depressed, anxious, and suicidal.
Yeah. We're fixing too much rather than stepping back and letting them figure it out.
100%. I completely agree with that.
Yeah. And they just want to figure it out. They really do. I think a lot of the defiance is just leave me be and let me do it.
Absolutely.
To be honest, that's the defiance I see.
Again, I want to live my life on my terms to do what I want. Thing of it is I'm an adult and I get a lot more opportunities to do that. But when you're a kid, yes, give them those chances and opportunities. Be flexible where you can. Let them fail. If they just said, I'm going to go to school today and tell off my best friend, I might say, there might be another way of handling that situation.
Right.
Nope, this is what I'm going to do. Okay. And then they come home.
How it goes.
It does not work out so well, but you have to let them fail. We grow when we fail, right? It's painful and uncomfortable, but it makes us stronger people.
I have really enjoyed this conversation. We probably could talk for another 2 hours, easy. But how do people find you?
I'm everywhere. The easiest thing to do is just Google my name. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. I'll give folks the website to the treatment model that I implement.
Perfect.
Intensive Family Focused Therapy is just myiffft.org. So myiffft.org. But anybody just Googles my name, I should pop up in all kinds of different places.
I'll put all the links in the show notes too, so people can find you. Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. I've loved this conversation. I love talking to a fellow psychologist because they ask great questions. And I love being challenged, right? Well, I don't think I would do it that way. Well, okay, great. What would you do, right? And maybe I'll learn something from you and vice versa. So it's been a great interview, and I've enjoyed it tremendously. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Wonderful. And that's a wrap. Thank you, parents, for taking time out of your busy day to listen in. I appreciate you. If you found the episode enlightening, please like, review, and share with a friend navigating the teen years. Until next time, stay curious. Remember, there's always more to the story than what you see.